All right. Well, this week we begin with vaYiqra, which is known as Leviticus to the Western world, chapter 15, verse 27. So, to remind us where we were last week, we ended with 26. We were talking about the woman, because remember, this starts off speaking about, it could be argued speaking about people in general, but the text does not support that. It's talking about men and men alone. And then it briefly touches a situation with a man with a woman, very briefly, and then it switches over to the woman, and then it'll sum up from there. Uh, so it says, everything that lays down on her, speaking of the woman that's menstruating, or that lays on her in all the days of her flow, is as her menstruation laying on it. Uh, and every implement that dwells on it, that which has been touched, is unclean. It is as unclean as her menstruation. So now, the sages really took this way out of context and connected man to woman and all that stuff, and it has nothing to do with it. When it says everything that lays down upon her, it's talking about if she's wearing a scarf, that's laying upon her. Glasses laying upon her. Talit, sweater, jacket, whatever. Sheets, blankets, those type of things. Jewelry, any of that kind of thing that lays on the skin at any part and anywhere. That's what they're talking about. It has nothing to do with men and women being together. Just nothing. It doesn't. All right. So we begin today on 27, and very, very literally in English, it says, "And all that touches in them, it unclean, and wash garment." This is his, and wash in waters, and unclean to the evening. Um, so it's anything that touches. This is bomb, which is in them. Them being the plural of it in Hebrew. Bomb. Just over the years, people have told me there's no word for it in Hebrew. Yes, there is. The Hebrew word for he means it, and the Hebrew word for she means it, as does the Hebrew word for they or them. Those are the plural, feminine and masculine. Okay, then it's whatever gets touched is unclean. And then it says garments. His is what I would normally translate that as, but it's the garments are the it's. I don't know how else to say that. And wash and unclean and odd ha'arab until the evening. So our translation, and anything that touches that which she has touched is unclean and is to be washed, as well as her garments, and she will bathe in water and will be unclean until the evening. So the verse makes it clear that the woman's clothing, along with anything she touched and or that was touched by anything she touched, I'm not going to go there. That's not really right. I was going to say anything she touched, anything that was touched by that would be unclean, but I'm not going to go there. The text of this verse simply doesn't say that, so I'm going to leave that out. Forget you heard that. Strike it from the record. 28, very, very literal. And if clean her from flow her, and number her to her 7 days, and after she clean. Right? You just almost already know what that's going to say, because the word for if it means behold, it means truly, it means certainly, because it's the word lo. Uh, it can be a question. It can be conditional. This word is used in an awful lot of ways. So I just always put the word if there, but you could put because. Tahara. Now, if clean her is what that literally means. So if she's become clean, well, now there's a lot of things that have to make her clean. So that's not really what's being said. What's being said is if the flow is stopped. You have to keep it in context to understand it. Mizuva, if the flow has become clean, in other words, it has stopped. Let's see. Then she's going to Safra. She's going to count a number. She's going to set the numbers, and then the La for herself. Shivat. She's going to set for herself a number of 7 yamim, 7 days. And from the time that she became clean, of the time that it stopped, in other words. So, and when the flow has healed up or has stopped, either way, she will number 7 days after she is purified. And again, that's not actually saying that she's purified before the 7 days. That's part of the 7-day purification. It's just saying that after the flow has stopped. Okay. Well, maybe I will rifle through these pretty quick. Forgot to start a little timer there. So literally 29 says, and they the 8th shall take to her 2 turtle doves or 2 children of the doves and make come, which means bring her, them to the Kohen, to the entrance tent appointed times. Should sound familiar because this is what the man had to do if he had that skin disease. Uvayom, and the day, Ha-Shemini, and the 8th day, the day of the 8th, Tikach, she will take. It's written in the command form, but it's also written in the feminine. So she will take La to herself, Shete, that's 2, Rorim, 2 turtle doves. O, that's the Hebrew word O, which means or in English. Or she's going to take 2 turtle doves, or Shene, that's the word for 2, B'nai, which is children, Yonah, or 2 young doves. That would be a year around a year old. I suppose it could be a year or less would be the right way to say that. This is Otam El, so she'll take them, Ha-Kohen, to the Kohen, El Petach, that's to the entrance. She's not going to go past the entrance. She's going to bring them to the entrance. Ohel Moed, of the tent of appointed times. There's not a whole lot to that. And on the 8th day, she will take 2 turtle doves and 2 young doves and bring them to the Kohen at the entrance of the tent of meetings, the tent of appointed times, whatever you want to call that, the Ohel Moed. Now we can compare that to verse 15 or 14 rather in this same chapter. And on the 8th day, he, speaking of the man with the flow, will take 2 turtle doves. Well, I have and here. I'm betting it's or. 2 young doves and appear before the face of Yahweh at the entrance of the tent of meetings and give them to the Kohen. Given that the next verse tells us that the Kohen appears before the face of Yahweh in the next verse, and including the fact that the woman brings her offering to the entrance of the Ohel Moed, like the man does, we should know that she is also appearing before the face of Yahweh, or at least the Kohen is in her place. And thus it's unnecessary to say that here, because you're supposed to know, if you understand Hebrew literature of the time, you understand that the same thing's happening for the woman that's happening for the man. Uh, it could be seen as unfair that a woman should have to make this offering every month. After all, it's not her fault that she has an issue. However, this is a Thanksgiving offering. The woman was given a gift from God that the man is not given. He does not have this gift, and it is a gift. The woman is able to carry and bring children into the world, and she is reminded of this wonderful gift every month, except while she, of course, is carrying that gift from God. No wonder women are often sad when that time ends. It must feel as if God has taken something precious from her. However, the time comes when it is no longer safe for a woman to carry a child, and thus God gives the woman yet another gift: long life in which to enjoy the grandchildren. Now, I know there's probably some of the women out there saying, well, what about the pain, and what about the. Well, that came because of sin. That's all I'm going to say about it. I don't want to get into an argument with anybody about that. It's just your point of view. You can see it as a gift, and you can see it as something wonderful from God, or you can be mad at God, uh, because of all the side effects. But, well, God is perfect, pure, and holy, and He's not doing anything as everything is designed to work the best way it should work. It was done properly. Why it's painful? Maybe that's because of the sin. Maybe that's just you can't get around that. Um, I don't know if you guys know this, but scientifically speaking, a mammal of the size of a human being, the gestation period should be 2 years, which scientifically speaking means that babies are born dramatically premature. And that makes those babies very, very vulnerable. And all of this stuff that goes together with the pain and the sacrifice of the woman, psychologically speaking, is actually very helpful to the woman to have the empathy needed to take care of something, and someone so utterly fragile and dependent on that someone. And it is believed by some in the scientific world that this is why the vast majority, statistically speaking, of women are far more empathetic and far more ready to be pleasing to others than men are. If you want a really deep dive on that, just look that subject up with Jordan Peterson. He really covered that very, very well in several of his teachings. But anyway, let's move on. Now, verse 30, very literally in English, says, and make the Cohen the one sin and the one burnt. So he's saying take one of the birds and make a sin offering, and the other one is a burnt offering, and cover upon her, because we're talking about the woman is now making the sacrifice, the Cohen to face his Yahweh from flow, unclean her. Again, it's so straightforward. There's almost nothing I can say about these verses. So it looks like we're going to get into the overview that I wanted to get in. I was hoping I could get into it today. It looks like we're going to. Okay, so ve'asa, so he's going to make the Kohen. Now it says HaKohen. So the Kohen is going to make Ha'echad, the one, speaking of the bird, because the verse just said to bring the two birds. And the Kohen's going to take the one and make a sin offering. Now, did that woman do something wrong having that monthly flow? No, no. But that flow makes her unclean. It's a heck of a reminder about people staying clean from blood. I guess you could look at it that way if you're looking for something positive about that. I don't know. Not going to help a lot of people. And then ve'et ha'echad, and the other one, olah, which is the Hebrew word for burnt offering. Ve'chiper, which is an cover or covering, alecha, over her, HaKohen. So it is, the text is very literally saying that the Kohen making that sacrifice, he becomes her covering for the impurity that was on her during that time. Lipnei Yahweh, before the face of God. It could be argued that the sacrifice is the covering, but that's not what the text says. So I'm sticking with the text. Mizuv is, of course, from the flow, to Mata, which is that made her unclean. So, and the Kohen will perform with them, speaking of the birds, one sin offering and one burnt offering, and the Kohen will be a covering before the faces of Yahweh over her uncleanness. That is what the text says. Now we can compare that to verse 15 of this very same chapter. And the Kohen will perform with them, speaking of the birds, one sin offering and one burnt offering. So I was right about that. Should have been or instead of and the Kohen will be a covering before the faces of Yahweh over him who had the flow. So either way, when that Kohen is making that offering, according to the biblical text, he is the covering, not the offering. All right. The sin offering is not, I've already said the same thing. It's not because, the guy gets this skin disease. It's not because he did something wrong. I guess it could be, but the assumption here is not that it's something that he's done wrong, so now he has to confess his sins and ask for forgiveness. No, none of that's being spoken of here. All it's saying is when he's become unclean or she's become unclean for whatever reason, they make the sacrifice. The Kohen is their covering. Okay, 31. And make consecrated them, children Yisrael, from uncleanness them, and not he die they, which is, how you translate that word. In uncleanness them. I don't know if that's in there twice. I don't know if I just typed it twice or we'll see. Tabernacle me that in midst them. Okay, so it probably is. Vehi zabtim, which is, and make to consecrate. This word is in Hebrew, thus it is a command of separation. So what separates them from everybody else? Well, the laws of purity. The Jews lived in a time and a place where people dealt with this issue very differently, and some people, if not most, didn't deal with it at all. It was, people don't really realize this, but we've become accustomed in the West to, I don't know, maybe most of us take a shower every single night. Some may skip a day here or there, whatever, particularly on the weekends if they're lazy. But they're, I'm not saying that as a bad thing. I like to be lazy on the weekend. But up until the time that the Western world began to intermix socially and financially with the Muslim world, not the Jewish world, people didn't take baths very often. Not very often at all. Now, there's a couple of cultures that, the royalty maybe did, but not pretty much nobody else. So when we watch these old movies, we can't imagine the world they lived in because we can't smell what that world would have smelled like, and it would have smelled very bad. But the Muslims, of course, they hate this, but they took the Hebrew Bible, and rewrote it, perverted it horrifically, just as the Christians did, and made it their own thing, right? So the Muslims got all of these ideas of purity and all of that kind of stuff literally from the Jews. So in the end, it comes from this. But the Jews lived, it wasn't about taking a bath every day. It was about, at the very least, taking a bath at any time there was some impurity there. So anyway, just a piece of history there that probably nobody wanted to know. So God is saying this will separate them basically from all others. And who are the them? B'nai, I'm sure it's going to say Yisrael, right? Yeah, Yisrael. So the children of Israel. That this clean life that we live physically will separate us. Mitum atam, from our uncleanness, not from the world's uncleanness, from our uncleanness. That's another thing that gets so jumbled up because of the modern world. Jews and Christians alike think that they're responsible for the rest of the world. They got to get everybody to live by our laws. They got to get everybody to see everything our way. No, this is all, this is for us, not them. Velo yamuto, so that they won't die. So that they won't die. Right here, we've just been given the reason why we're supposed to live a pure life, so that we don't die. Because pathogens are spread this way. Viruses are spread this way. Lots of things are spread this way through the blood and through just the impurity of people in general. Stuff passes on between people. All right, so they won't die batuma, in their uncleanness. At mishkani, that's God saying, my temple here, asher betocham, in the midst of them. So what's he saying? Thus you shall separate the children of Israel from their uncleanness, so that they do not die in uncleanness with their defilement of me. God's taking this very personally, with their defilement of, or not me, their defilement of my tabernacle, which is in the midst of them. That's interesting. We're not defiling God. We can defile each other. And God doesn't want this defilement in the midst of his tabernacle. That gives me some thoughts I'm going to look into this week. 32. This instruction, that flow, and that shall go out from us, effusion seed, to unclean her in her. And again, the her and the her is not necessarily of a woman or a female. It's the feminine of the word it. All right, so Zot Torah. So this instruction, you hear Torah, you hear Torah here. Torah is instruction, it is not law. This instruction, so God is teaching us, giving us the instructions on how to carry out his laws. This instruction, this is the instruction, Hazab, of concerning the flow. Ba'asher, Teze, when the flow that goes out, concerning the flow that goes out, maybe Mimanu, from us. Well, I'll speak of that in a minute. Sichvat, that's the effusion zera, so the fusion of seed. Ba. Yeah, I did translate this right. This is the instruction concerning a flow that goes out from us and the effusion of seed because they, it. The, what are the they here? The flow and the seed, the fusion of the seed, because that's the they, because they are unclean. Not because you are unclean, not because we are unclean, but because that flow, those two types of flow, are unclean. All right, then our last verse. And that week in menstruation and the flow, flow it, to male and to woman and to man, that it that he lie down with unclean. Okay. Veha dava, this is a new word. I don't think we've had this one here before in this chapter anyway. It's languid, it's sick, it's used of the flow, both of the woman and of the man. It's to be ill, it's to be nasty. I mean, it's gross, icky, it's all those things. So this, we're going to call it weakness for now. Benidata, so the ickiness of menstruation, vehazav, and of the flow, so that includes the man, at zavo, which is the, let's see, does it say? Yeah, le zachar, which is, and the flow of the man. So it starts off with the menstruation and the flow of the man. Vela nekeva, and of the woman. U leish, and to man. Asher, which means that. Yishkav, which is he lie down. It's pouring out. The flow flowing out. Im tame, with uncleanness. So let's see if I did this right. Okay. And the weakness, ickiness in the flow of menstruation, the flow from humans and of men and women who lay down in uncleanness. Now, this is not talking about men and women being together and having kids and stuff. That's not being called unclean. It's the flow from the man who has the skin illness, or the flow from the man's seed, or the flow from the woman's menstruation. That's what's being called unclean here. That's the laying down in the uncleanness. Because remember, talking about sitting in a chair is the same thing as laying on a bed, and laying on a bed is the same thing as sitting in a chair, because it means to bend down and recline, to bend down and sit, or to bend down in order to lay down. All right, so that's going to conclude. How much time do I have left? It's pretty close. All right, let me go ahead and do the summation for this chapter. The subject has not changed. We are still dealing with skin diseases or skin infections. I wish I would have thought of that word earlier, because it might have been helpful. Verse 1 is the change of the topic or perhaps the category, but it is not the change of the subject. So it's in Yahweh spoke to Moshe and to Aharon saying, that's to let us know that there's a new subcategory, if you will. Verse 2, instead of Moshe and Aharon being told to teach the people, this verse tells them to teach the people to teach their children. So yeah, they have to teach the people, and that is part of the verse. But the more important thing is they're being told to teach the people. This is, what they are supposed to teach their own children. And I gave the example because normally the text will say something like, Va yedaber Yahweh el Moshe lemor. And instead this time, it's in and Yahweh spoke to Moshe saying, well, that doesn't make any sense. I don't think I wrote that out right. Oh, I didn't give that to myself. That's what I get for staying up all night. Anyway, the text is very different. Compare what it usually says when it says, and Yahweh spoke to Moshe saying, and then in this time, Yahweh spoke to Moshe and Aharon saying, teach the children, when us. You remember all the we and the us that was in there? That changes it to you're teaching them to teach themselves. All right. Okay, so verse 2 says, speak to the children of Israel and tell them to say, because it says one to another, that's that man to man thing, one to another, which means teach your children, uh, to them man, teach your children. The man teaches the son, right? When there is a flow from the skin, that flow is unclean. So verse 2 is literally different than normal because, well, I've already said all that. So, but this verse, of course, is limited to a generic and otherwise not previously identified flow emanating from the skin. It's like God's kind of grabbing all the rest of it and tossing it all into this last little bit here. Tears, snot, and earwax have nothing to do with this, and they're not mentioned, nor does the text give us a reason why they're not mentioned. The effusion of semen and menstruation are dealt with individually, as well as the skin infection itself. Verse 3, we are unclean if we have a running sore anywhere on our skin. Even if the flow stops, the flow itself made us unclean. Hopefully you remember that. In verse 4, it said, A, lying down, both for sleep and from sickness. It doesn't matter what we lay down on or sit down on or even where it is. The word is of the action of laying down or sitting down. It's of the action of reclining. Because the primary stock of this word, this 7901 in the Strongs, the primary stock has the power of bending, inclining oneself to lay oneself down or perhaps to set oneself down. And then we had to learn that the word dwell meant that this hat is dwelling on my head, these glasses are dwelling on my face. That's where that first appears. So the note from verse 4 was everything that flows out of the skin makes a person, and anything the flow touches unclean. However, we shall soon discover that once a person washes their clothing and their body, the impurity does not pass on. And we, as we did, right? Okay, I'm gonna leave some of that stuff out. It's just getting too convoluted. So in verse 5, we change from group rules. Again, it can be argued that these are just rules for men. And if they are, then there's going to be rules for women on this same uh, context somewhere later in the verses. If they're not found later in the verses, then this is group rules. So I thought I'd better point that out. Okay, verse 6 was a general statement, which was of course followed by details in the next few verses. And of course, that's where we learn that armor and jewelry and tzitzit and talitot and kippot and just whatever happens to touch that skin becomes unclean. In verse 7, the details of that which was touched by the skin, by the hands while the flow was happening, and that which was, of course, 7 says, and that which was touched by the skin of he who has a flow, those garments will be washed. He will bathe in water and is unclean. Now, and remember, we're still talking about some sort of oozing sore on your skin. Um, I do not, after reviewing this chapter, I do not believe that we're talking about a person who scratches their arm on a wall and gets a little trickle of blood that stops. If there are laws on what happens if we touch our own blood, we haven't seen them. Maybe they'll come up, but we haven't seen them to this point. And this subject is very specific. It's not talking about you getting a scratch or a cut. This is a illness, something that, some oozing sore of some sort. Verse 8 details the part about the spittle. And boy, did this ever get taken out of context. Because it's to spit out, when followed by a bait, it is to spit upon anyone. This is a sneeze, a cough, or spittle that comes out while talking. It should not be thought of as a man spitting on someone else, though it would be included in this idea. The assumption here is that who's going to go spit on somebody, right? Because that's not what we're talking about in this verse. We're talking about, how some people talk, say it, don't spray it, little saying we have here in the West, because when they talk, spit comes out. We're talking about that sort of thing. We're talking about a sneeze that inadvertently you just got sneezed on, you just got coughed on. That's what we're talking about. But does this cover somebody just hawking a loogie on some random guy walking by? Yeah, it does. Well, if that random guy is Jewish. So that spittle makes the other person unclean. Here's where I messed up, is on verse 8. And I did write down what I wrote before, but I was very off. I just was looking at what the sages were saying, and I got caught up in that and didn't pay close attention. Here's what verse 8 actually says in English. And even if his spit is clear, who has a flow, guy who has a flow, he will wash his garments and bathe in water and is unclean until evening. It does not say if he spits on someone or something pure. That's where I made the mistake. I followed what everybody else did. And then when I went back and looked at the Hebrew text this morning, I was like, I missed that by a mile. Even if his spit is clear. Well, darn. Apparently, I'm supposed to take my pills. This The text does not speak of spittle transferring from one person to another, nor does the text say anything about another person needing to wash his or her body or clothing afterwards, right? And see, that's the road that we all went down. The sages went down it, and even I fell into it. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, well, it's not like icky, gross, it's clear, right? That's what's being spoken about here. Even so, if you have this oozing sore and your spit is clear, that doesn't make any difference. You're still unclean. Verse 9. So it's a real short one. It says, every seat that he with the flow is carried upon is unclean. This would include modern day cars, trucks, motorcycles, whatever. So when you get this flow, you really need to probably put some sort of material, lay it over your seat and tuck it in real good so it's not falling down. Because otherwise, now you got to wash your seats in your car or on your motorcycle or whatever. You need to cover that up if you're going to be in your vehicle going somewhere and you have this sort of skin. We're still on skin disease, by the way. All right. So everything that he touches, everything that's on him, everything that's under him, everything has to be washed. And again, we are talking about a skin disease. And verse 11 basically says the same thing as 10. But then it goes to verse 12 and says that if something is made out of clay, if you have this disease and you're using some kind of clay pot, you've now got to destroy it. You can't wash it. If it's made of wood or metal, or I would even go as far as to say plastic, it can be washed. And we know, through science that stuff can be washed and it can be purified. So I'm okay with that. 13, and when the flow is healed up, okay, so you gotta, once you healed up, you've got this 7 days that you count off, and we are still talking about the man with the disease. He's going to count up for himself 7 days, washes, and on the eighth day he'll wash himself and all that kind of stuff. And then, of course, on 14 it says, and on the eighth day he will take two turtle doves or two young doves and make a sin sacrifice. Can we do that these days? Well, no, we don't. One, we don't have a temple, and two, I wouldn't know how to do it anyway. You're talking to the wrong country boy here. Right? It's not that, farming's my thing. Slaughter is not. I know we're all supposed to know that stuff, but I don't. Um, so what do you do in place of that? You do the same thing the Jews have always done. You just make an offering. Now, two turtle doves. The reason why that's used are two, young pigeons. The reason, uh, not no, it's dove, not pigeon. Turtle doves or two young pigeons. I keep saying that young doves. Cheapers. The indication here is that this is a very, very small uh, offering. We're not talking about you know wiping out your check account once a month. That's not the point. The reason why this was used is because this was the cheapest of all things. They're free. If you can go out and shoot one and get it, or catch one, however, you don't have to pay for them. But you're making this sacrifice. Well, I guess some people would have had to pay for them. But whatever the value of that was, is what you paid. And I wouldn't go by today's prices because, if you go to a store now, you may have to pay a gazillion dollars for two turtle doves. I wouldn't go by that because that's not the idea. You're not going to a store to purchase these things and taking them to uh, the priest. So Hebrew is an idiomatic language, biblical Hebrew, idiomatic. Keep that in mind here. All it is saying idiomatically is that it is a small token of your appreciation. Okay, and then the Kohen will make the sacrifice, and he becomes the covering. Said those other things. 16, we have a new topic. The reason why instructions or law, whatever you want to call it, are going to be repeated. I wanted to say this about this. The reason why it seems like there's all these repeats that happen, here's the reason. It's because the previous laws pertain to a generic flow caused by an unknown skin disease, while these new and sometimes repeated instructions pertain to the Sikvat Zara or the Nida. I don't know if I made that clear, so let me try this again. I think I hit the wrong button earlier, didn't I? I finally understand why everything seems to be repeated so much. It's because this first set of, when you first go through that first set of rules, sometimes there's an overstatement or a general statement, and then there's detailed information in the next statements, and then there's a summary at the ending. That happens when essentially everybody is involved. Well, the reason why it's happening here is different. The reason why you get some overlap here is because some of the rules that apply to a man who has the skin disease are going to be applied to the man who has the effusion of seed, and maybe even one or two of those will apply to the woman in menstruation. But this is three separate sets of instructions for three separate categories under one and the same subject. All right. I hope that cleared it up. May have made it as clear as mud. I don't know. This is, of course, verse 16 is, of course, the first verse in the chapter that deals with semen. Men do not have menstrual cycles. They do not have that time of the month. However, some men do experience a slow discharge, as I said earlier, of semen over a span of several days, though that is rare. If it is not rare, if it is persistent, you need to go see a doctor. I don't know how serious it is or if it even is serious, but I do know that you need to go see a doctor and talk to a doctor, not a doctor of the law, a doctor of medicine. Now it says in this verse 16, and when an effusion of the seed of a man shall go out from us. And remember, the reason why the us is here is in this verse is because this is the man teaching the son. The reason why this happens to us, or when this happens to us, it should be that we bathe our clothes and we wash our bodies. That's why the us is there, because it's indicating that the man is teaching his son. Okay, now this verse 16, where all this starts, does not include a woman being involved in this, in the effusion of the seed. There's no indication that woman has anything to do with this here. Thus, anything expressed or implied here would be speculative. Now, what is expressed and implied here is the nocturnal emissions, as it's called. Surely that's part of it. I'm not saying that it's not, but it does lead to some questions. Is it the night emissions? Is it a man by himself? Is it a man with another man? Well, technically, it is all three. It's going to cover all three of those issues. The concern here is not whether this behavior is a sin or not, since this section concerns itself with only the impurity caused by the effusion of the seed, because we've just switched to that section. The argument concerning a man with a man is not spoken of here because it is improper to speak of it here. Because here we're talking about purity. More specifically, how to purify ourselves after we have become impure. That is what we're specifically talking about. And in the Hebrew writing style of the time, they didn't mix these things together. So to settle those issues, we will have to look at other laws. And it's in here. And you think this stuff was gross? Wait till you get to that one. Okay, 17. This is 17 is a general statement which will be followed by detailed rules for men and women. Okay, so this is basically whatever is touched by that effusion needs to be washed. They use the words that was laid upon, no doubt because of leakage. Notice here that there is no rule about touching anything between the place where that happened and the shower, right? So what it's saying is it has to be direct contact. So here's a note. If you do not wish to wash all of your bedding, you can lay on the floor. But then now you got to wash your carpet. Just saying. Or, well, let's see if I probably say that here. No, I didn't. Or you can get some type of a material. A sheet's not going to help because the effusion will leak right through that sheet. It may leak right through your blanket. You need some sort of a material that won't leak, and you can put that on the bed, or you can put that on the floor, or wherever. I hope I've said. I think I've said more than enough. I hope I've said enough, but I think I've said too much. Okay, now this rule is still in verse 18. This rule is still about the man. It brings the woman into the picture, but the rule is still about the man. And a man who lays, well, let me go back over here. And a man who lays down with a woman and infuses seed with her, they will bathe in water and are unclean until evening. So it does bring that in, and it does affect the woman. She does have to bathe and all that stuff, and is unclean until evening, just like he is. But it's still the rule for the man. It's not exactly the rule for the woman. The verse does not express intention. That is to say, a man and a woman can simply be sharing a bed with nothing happening between them. However, if a man has a dream during the night, or just has the effusion, however it happens, because it does not always going to be connected to a dream. Both people in the bed or everybody in the bed, what do you do if that happens when you and all your kids, fell asleep watching TV in your bed watching your television? That stuff happens. Well, everybody's got to take a bath. In 19, there's a change in the topic again. Now we're switching. Now in 19, we switch to the rules for the women. And it gets very specific here about that stuff. Well, 19 specific to those who touch the woman while she's in menstruation. And when a woman shall have a flow of blood in her flesh 7 days, it shall be known as her menstrual cycle, and anyone who touches her is unclean until evening. No one who touches a woman during my mouth stopped. No one who touches a woman during her cycle is here being told to shower or wash their clothes. I didn't catch that before. Nope, they're not. This verse is why, when I was growing up, as I said before, men were taught to never extend their hand to shake a woman's hand. If a woman is clean, she may extend her hand to a man to indicate that she is safe to touch. This lesson was part of my proper education in etiquette. Yes, my mother taught myself and my siblings etiquette. These days, I find that few people have ever heard of that practice, a man waiting for a woman to extend her hand. Thus, I find it safer not to shake and hug women I don't know or of a certain age. This verse is the catalyst for the tradition of rabbis not touching any woman, which, since they have to stay pure to do their job, you can understand why they do that, right? Hopefully, there is a reason behind it. But you have a choice here. If you are at work or just run into an old friend while out in public, you can shake their hand and or hug them. Now, didn't this law just say? No, it didn't say you couldn't. It said this is what you have to do if you decide to make that choice. You just have to go home and shower. Unless you are comfortable asking women if they are menstruating before you shake or hug their hand or hug them. I wouldn't recommend it though, as they will probably never speak to you again, you weirdo. There is no sacrifice that has to be made, nor any clothing that has to be washed. That's not part of this law. However, you will not be able to attend any religious service or meetings or get-togethers between your touch of that person and the evening, right? So you might think about before you shake some strange woman's hand or hug somebody. Whether you're, a woman that's menstruating, you should be careful about who you touch. You're going to touch your kids. You're going to give them a bath before bedtime anyway. What's the difference? Unless that evening they have some special event at their synagogue, then maybe you should think about not touching them. And maybe that husband needs to get in there and help get the baths done and the kids ready and all that kind of stuff. Just saying, just throw that out there. So you follow what I'm saying here? There's no rule here about just because you've touched them that they have to take a bath and wash clothing, and none of that's part of this. It's just that they're unclean until the evening. So that's a cutoff from the synagogue, from other worshipers of Yahweh. That's all that is. So that's the thing you got to keep in mind. Do we have anything coming tonight? Some going on at the synagogue that I need to be there? Because then maybe you don't want to shake some woman's hand you don't know. Because if you don't know, you shouldn't be asking, and you should just assume that maybe they're menstruating, and you should do what you have to do to stay pure, and that in this case, it's stay away from the synagogue. This verse that I've been talking about is specific to anything that touches or is touched by a woman during the flow of blood while she is menstruating, being unclean. So, if you're worried about, your 80-year-old grandma, get over it. She's long since past that point of no return, if you know what I'm saying. So you don't have to worry about being unclean. Be kind to the elderly woman. Hug them. Love on them. Tell them how much you appreciate them. You never have to worry about that with them. Okay, in verse 20, it's saying everything that the menstruating woman lays on or sits on is unclean. And as I pointed out before, the subject of this particular piece of this chapter is flowing. Thus, if the flow has been stopped, the impurity does not transfer. In verse 21, it tells the woman what to do when she touches or is touched during the flowing of the blood. It's still just a general statement at this point, and it is followed by some details after that. Okay, so 21 says, and everything that was touched when laying down will be washed, as well as her garments, and she will bathe in water and will be unclean until evening. This is very important, so listen, because you're probably already questioning what I've been saying. This verse pertains to there's no man involved in this verse. We are still speaking about women, right? Didn't say anything about the men. But remember, there's the rule about the bed and the menstruation. Think about this a minute. In the case of the man, if there's a fusion, they're both, even though they haven't touched, have to take a shower. What I'm trying to tell you is verse 21 doesn't do the same thing with menstruation. Although I would argue for it. I'd say if that happened, maybe when you get up in the morning, you probably should take a shower or something. I don't know. But it's not there. It does not say that. It doesn't say that when she's in that time. It says everything she touches is unclean. Well, then that does involve the man. If you're touching something unclean, what does that do to you? My mind is really just going bing, 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 bing. Because just because you're unclean does not mean that your uncleanness passes on. And this verse does not pass it on. It doesn't say that, at least not here, that her menstruation passes on to the man. It just says it passes on to whatever she touches, what she touches, not what he touches. Yeah, and then it goes on and talks about the inanimate objects that she touches become unclean. Okay, so 24, this is where we get the clarity. And if a man lay down to lay with her, and her menstruation is upon her during the 7 days of her uncleanness, anyone who lay down with her is unclean. So that makes it clear. I do realize this is more than just sharing the bed, but it's going to include sharing the bed, which is why so many Jews sleep in separate beds during this time, or maybe at all times. That's kind of where that tradition came from, with mom and dad sleeping in separate beds. That was something that Jews were used to, and so when they started the whole television industry, you used to see that a lot in TV shows. The mom and dad would have separate beds. Okay, and then in verse 25, it spoke about what happens, speaking about, okay, now the flow has gone beyond the 7 days. You just treat them as if you're still within the 7 days. That's all it's saying. Until the flow stops, you're essentially, you have to live your life as if it's the normal 7-day period, no matter how many days that lasts. So think about a woman who had an issue of blood for 12 years. That's rough. So the subject of the chapter, of course, is skin disease, which, while it does not mean that the effusion of seed or menstruation is a disease. It's not saying that. It is treated in much the same way. That's why they're put together, because there's this connection that they're not considered a disease, but disease can come as a result of it. So they are treated like a disease, though they are not thought of as a disease. Also, anytime a woman has a running flow of blood, she is unclean at all times. She does not become clean at evening because the flow has not stopped. Um, it says she's unclean until evening, if you recall, because, you know, if she's taken the shower and she's gone to bed, everything's been washed, and she wakes up in the morning and there is no flow, well, she's clean. She doesn't have to add an extra day. Remember that? And then in 26, it was talking about all the things that she wears and that touches her are unclean. 27 seems to be saying that everything that she touches, everything that touches anything that she touches is unclean. I don't buy that. You can live that way if you want to. If she kisses her husband when he comes home and she's in her flow, then all of a sudden he's unclean. It's not said anything like that up until this very point. But if you're worried about that kind of thing, take a shower and you'll be clean as soon as the sun goes down. Okay, I've gone over a little bit. Let me try to finish this up and make sure I haven't missed anything. Okay, and then we go to the sacrifices, and the Cohen is the covering. The Cohen makes the sacrifice. Okay, and so then 31, thus you shall separate the children of Israel from their uncleanness, so that they do not die in uncleanness with their defilement of my tabernacle. So your uncleanness, if you don't live according to the laws of God and you keep going to synagogue, you are defiling the temple of God. And God wants you to live this way so that you don't die in your uncleanness as a part of the tabernacle of God. That's pretty hardcore. Think about it. It's letting us know just how important it is for us to follow these instructions. And then in 32, it says it's because the menstruation and the seed is unclean that makes us unclean, which also means that the time spent between a husband and his wife is not unclean, though there is uncleanness that comes from that. And God wants us to stay pure. That laying down an uncleanness kind of bothers me, is I'm not sure that I'm saying it right in English. We're not talking about the relationship between a man and a woman. That's not what they're talking about when it says laying down an uncleanness. The laying down an uncleanness is you attend your service and you're part of this, of your congregation, and you don't live a clean life. And God's saying, I don't want that among my people. I want my people to live a pure life. All right, I'm a little over time, but it's not too bad. Shalom shalom, y'all. I got to push some buttons here. Turn this thingy off. Whoa, got lost it.
בעברית, יברך יהוה ויש מרך, יאר יהוה פניו אליך ויהונך, יישא יהוה פניו אליך וישם לך shalom. And in English, may Yahweh cause you to lie down so that you may rest. May he touch and caress you. May he prepare you for what is ahead. May he watch over you. May he keep you from harm. May he cause goodness to grow in you and take away the bad. May he arrange your life and cause you to flourish. May he cheer you up and gladden your heart. May he cause his light to shine through you. May he show you tenderness, favor, and love in his presence. May he show you kindness and be delicate towards you. May he show you his generosity, mercy, compassion, and desire for you as it comes forth from the depths of his soul. May he lift you out of your pit and deliver you from the things that hold you prisoner. May he draw you to his chest and cast his eyes on yours. May he show you his love and desire for you as he cradles you in his arms. May he bear your punishment and pardon you of your sin. May he take you for his bride. May he establish a foundation in you. May he place his name on your heart and mind and make your body his temple. May you be his treasure. May you always be on his mind. May he draw you near and comfort you when you are afraid. May he assure you there is nothing to fear because he is with you. May you and all that concerns you be at peace because he is.